bello avere quello che ti serve quando ti serve. Con EasyBank, la banca digitale di Intesa San Paolo. EasyBank, semplicemente banca.
Questo è un luogo che genera dialogo.
Qualcuno che si impegna, che si batte.
Che approfondisce la conoscenza. È un crocevia, dove si incontra chi desidera il vero, il bello, il giusto e il bene. È una testimonianza di speranza nel cuore ferito del presente. E tutto questo esiste anche grazie a te.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this encounter at the 2025 Rimini meeting with the title "The Development for a Unified Europe." The question of Europe has been a consistent one over this meeting. We've had Draghi here, there was Metsola here this morning, and the feeling has always been that of thinking about Europe, that we've been slipping towards irrelevance, both geopolitical and economic, but also inevitably a cultural one, among which the many global challenges we're faced with that the 27 countries of the Union seem to be dragging. So with the guests we have here that I'll present to you soon, we'd like to talk about all this through a particular lens which is tied particularly to the economy, to that of welfare, which represents a unique model in the world, the European one. A model that is also not necessarily guaranteed. It can be put at risk, and our guests will talk about this now, but we want to think about how to come towards a model of development, not only economic, but also social, that's sustainable with regards to the many challenges that we're inevitably facing. I'll present our guests to us, even though I don't think they need much of an introduction. I'll start on my right with Andrea Dellabianca, the president of Compagnia delle Opere. Then Raffaele Fitto, the executive vice president of the European Commission for Reforms and Cohesion. And finally, Giorgio Vittadini, the president of the Foundation for Subsidiarity. So as I was saying, we'll start with you, President Vittadini. So from what you said, some of the points I raised briefly, welfare, the kind of destiny of welfare in Europe, the problems tied to what are those great economic problems that we're having in Europe, as well as the challenges of cohesion, both economic and social, within Europe. So starting from your discussion here, from what you say, we'll launch our chat, our debate, from what you say, from your words here. Thank you. First, I'd like to introduce in three broad sections before arriving at the political themes of cohesion. First, a brief reflection on European welfare, which perhaps sometimes we forget uses a great deal of resources. If you think about in the US, there's a selective model based on the idea that welfare should only intervene where the market isn't enough. That the state should be a safety net, and the public public spending is about 18%, but it's quite fragmented. The healthcare system is primarily private and expensive. So what does exist, like Medicaid, is mostly for the very poor or for the ancient or for the elderly, and it's got very very low effects on poverty reduction. It's a very neoliberal model, Italy, and there's obviously great inequality because of that. If you think about Manhattan, the life expectancy changes by many years from one block to another. In Europe, we have a more universalist model, that is healthcare, education, and assistance that are for everyone. It's many different ways of doing it, maybe. The social democratic one in the north of Europe, the French model, the German model is a bit more conservative, and the Italian one is based on the national health system, on national interventions for social assistance, and a system of education that's also that public and national. So anyway, we have about 25 to 30% of our GDP invested into this. And the idea is that, universality, so access for everyone has the right to access this. It's incredible how, a foreigner even a foreigner that arrives here can have a type of operation or treatment that's equal to that of an Italian person who may have an average or high income. And we've lived with this kind of conception. The question that arises is, can we go on infinitely? We go on like spending like this? Think about the aging population and the slowing economy, and this is the scenario we're in now. And the question I'd like to open for the Commissioner and for the other Vice President here is that of the budget, because obviously between when faced with debt and the aging population and such, we have a common budget among European institutions that has a very small scope. The idea is that is this budget enough to guarantee this universality in the coming years, where, as we've been seeing in Italy and many here, we've been talking about it in the meeting, the birth rate is falling and the population is aging, so there's fewer workers and thus fewer people paying tax and fewer people who can allow this return. We've also said that Italy, single countries won't be able to manage if there's not a European system in which they can operate. Perhaps perhaps there's a problem for this universality that's an increase in the budget. And the third aspect is about cohesion policy. There are many questions, because first of all, what is cohesion policy for the Vice President Fitto? Because policies of cohesion can have a certain vision, and there has been in Italy, that is of giving funds to those who are poor, without necessarily thinking to what that money is needed for, from the perspective of thinking that this may be a factor for development. And this is the first topic that says that cohesion could be different. I think that for Raffaele the concept is a bit different. These are questions that arise today. Spending in Italy. It's not that Italy's spending will go on to fulfill what it wants to do. And the third point of being critical here on this budget is the risk of verticalization, that this budget that's conceived by sectors may undo the vision of the regions and of the state, that may then articulate how to act on these cohesion policies, with also as an aspect that maybe these in the cohesion policies of years before there were fewer opportunities, and that these policies, perhaps as happens with Erasmus or in universities, or with the cooperation funds, or with the horizons, that are that the private social recipients can be direct interlocutors for the creation of policy. So summarizing, we have universal welfare, a small budget, and some questions over cohesion policies that both in the past and in the future would require great vision. And I think today's encounter may be a chance for us to learn something about how the responsibility or the interventions of people like Fitto, who has behind him a great history of the of interventions as the president of a region and then a minister, of how to articulate a new set of cohesion policies in the modern day. And these are the kind of the provocations I'd like to leave open. Thank you, President Vittadini, for this introduction, which, you're right, has offered us a lot of food for thought here. I'd like to think about, first of all, about the budget, because it's the hottest topic politically, really. And so, quite rightly, what did Vittadini highlight? So that the balance between the budget and GDP is strongly unequal. So how is it possible to come to a balance from that point of view? Also overcoming the particular national problems, because some of these problems are shared and some of them aren't. And this obviously refers also to the issue of cohesion we said earlier. Thank you. Good evening. As always, I'm very happy to be here at the meeting, to take part, and to have this chance for dialogue in this new context here this year. I was following the meeting in the past few days, including and it's become obvious that the common theme of the debates at many levels on many topics is represented by that the capacity that Europe has these days, and from where to begin in order to develop more specific sector-based evaluations. So Europe and its member states have built in these years a welfare system that's quite strong, but that also has limits and has some errors, but that surely over the past few years has represented something that has consolidated, even when faced with what's happening in the world, quite a solid prospect. And I say that because I've had the opportunity, the honor, to see in this year's the different roles in the EU. I was in the European Parliament for a long time. I see many of my colleagues here, and that represents a very important experience, even because it's legitimized by citizens. As a minister, I was able to take a role within the Council, within the Commission, and now I have the great honour to be a member of the EU Commission. Europe cannot be, simplified. Europe is all this. It's very complex, and it has a great institutional complexity. And this is this decision-making power is one of the central topics in the debates these days. And this has allowed us, even within the European Commission, to make some important decisions. President von der Leyen has created some new commissions that previously weren't there. And this is showing how the world is changing. It was unthinkable to have a commissioner for defense a few years ago. The commissioner for simplification is a great advancement, which centers on one of the key problems that we debate these days, but also tied to the level of flexibility. That is the ability that Europe must have, even given the complex institutional conditions we have, to be able to be efficient in how it operates. It's true that in the past you could build a system that was solid, of choices, and so there was a budget that was biannual that worked, and from the year that you approved for the next 7 years, these days we have some challenges before us that don't allow us to operate in the old way, because the idea of flexibility is central. The ability to change quickly depending on the scenarios we're faced with, from COVID to the Ukraine war. We have some concrete examples of this, or when it was necessary to intervene with a complex set of procedures, and it shows how it's fundamental these days to have a budget that centers on flexibility and that can be able to define political choices even when faced with changes in the situationship. The idea of tariffs makes this all the more obvious. We can't keep having the same old approach. But when faced with this, there may be sectors that need more care, that need for evaluation, that may need an intervention. And there was the invasion of Ukraine. We had to change how our institutions operated, and all as was COVID with Next Generation represents another great innovation, even in terms of the choice to share a common debt at the European level, which that represented, and it was a big novelty. It's the first time that we took a step in that direction, and the new budget has these characteristics. The topics of being more flexible have their role to play, and I think that the proposal of the Commission should be of having long discussions with the Council and with Parliament. This is obviously, it's important to underline this, because the logic of European institutions and how they are articulated, how they function, is an important topic. Because there isn't a single interlocutor, a single responsible entity. There are many institutions that must answer to the problems. And the problem that arises with simplification and being more flexible is evaluating our institutions and their capacity to be able to act much more quickly on the institutional processes we have. And this is a topic that we can't flee from. And it's not about the European question, it's about the entire setup of the Union. So this budget has been the topic of much debate, has some elements of simplification that's very clear. There's some parts that indicate in identifying different funds, the ability of coming to some decisions that can help provide some answers. So before going into the middle of the budget, I'd like to take a step back first. The future budget, is a budget that will look at the 2028 to 2034. If you'll let me, we have to reach 2028 first. We're at 2025 now, so there's a period between now and then that needs to be covered, in which we'll still need to intervene in certain things and still need to be capable to provide some strategic answers to the challenges towards, for example, conflicts and the geopolitical state that's constantly shifting towards the shifting political situation, the ability to identify a kind of European protagonism that in a continent of 450 million citizens, to allow us to be able to simplify our processes. And it's important both for kind of freeing up the internal market that can provide a great opportunity to understand, because there are sometimes many internal barriers that need to be overcome, as well as relations between the member states. And secondly, there's the idea of flexibility, because in the 2021 to 2027 program, there's the budget, and I'd like to give this example because I think it makes it clear the sense and the path that we're trying to carry. It was my proposal in the European Commission, and it put forwards a revision of the cohesion policy. Giorgio was saying cohesion policy is reducing the divisions between the different territorial entities. It's the policies that it reflects on many aspects of the daily life of European citizens, and it's a set of policies which, you know, obviously if we're looking back, there's been some, you know, not perfect moments of the division of resources and of how we intervene on separate problems, but it represents cohesion is a third of the European budget, so it's not an irrelevant set of policies. It's a fundamental part of the European budget, referring to how we operate. So it'll be debated in September, and it will come towards the member states on a voluntary basis to rewrite the current, to reprogram the current policies, because we need to overcome rigidity. What we're currently looking at were policies set up in 2019 to 2021, and this agreement was identified what to do with these resources back then. This was written in 2022, this agreement, when Ukraine had just invaded Ukraine, when Russia just invaded Ukraine. And so these resources need to be spent today, and I think that's the first element that we need to start from in order to prioritize the question of flexibility and to understand how fundamental it is to change the decision that the Commission made towards the member states, you know, that will give you 5 new priorities on a voluntary basis. All of you, you know, depending on your own peculiarities and your own can decide to engage with 1, 2, or all 5 of them, of these priorities, in order to rewrite our policies. These 5 priorities are defense, which is a topic that it can be quite hot politically in Italy these days, and I think we need to be quite clear on this in future, in my opinion. Competitiveness, 2, energy, water, and energy and the home, which are key priorities that we have in the European context. These priorities are on a voluntary basis because they based on the budgetary work we're trying to do, because in the future budget we'll find of the regional and national plan, and we'll try to involve a concept of subsidiarity, of vertical subsidiarity, that, as we're doing now, should be open to a horizontal subsidiarity that's decisive with regards to the capacity to co-involve civil society in this context. And in this direction, the work that we're undertaking can allow us to confront the problems. You know, like I said, I've got a portfolio about the next generation, the PNRR, and coordinating certain commissioners, like on agriculture and tourism, on transport, fishing, and so why am I talking about this? Not to showcase my responsibilities, rather to show that in the logic of the new commission, there's the idea of trying to have a common vision of all these sectors, giving organic responses to our problems, because the idea of having opportunity and a voluntary action, there's some member states, Spain, Italy, Greece, that will use as a priority, you know, homes, energies, competitiveness, water. Others will use defense, will prioritize defense. You know, I visited in these months all the Baltic countries, and I was at the border of these Baltic countries. You know, there's a problem that they have a problem that's not just that of defense, but it's, you know, that of security, but it's also one of cohesion, because we have all these border regions that are in a dramatic economic crisis because they're closed regions. There's no more opportunities. So why am I talking about this? Because if we continue to have an approach on the context of defense and of security, for whom, you know, the Finnish, that's the Finnish border, you know, the Lithuanian, Estonian, we have that's wrong. It's the European border, and the cohesion policy needs to have the ability to adapt to this situation. You know, we'll enter more into detail later, but it represents a potential for addressing disparity and for building on a European level something that can reinforce these elements, these projects, and can give a perspective that would allow us to reduce inequality and to strengthen, I said earlier, the internal market. That also can create the conditions to give some new opportunities in this sense. Because the theme of cohesion policy in these days is in this context, and it represents something at the center of the great problems, the demographic problems, falling birth rate that you were talking about earlier, Giorgio, which are two big questions these days. There's also that of dealing with internal phenomena in Europe, in the big urban areas, the big problem of overpopulation, and the dramatic depopulation of rural areas. These are all issues that are involved in cohesion policy, and we need to come to a plan for the future that's capable of showing that, of demonstrating that it has vision, and that's our main problem these days.
President, now we'll come down to the detailed level a bit. So some of the we've heard this precise talk, and you too have been speaking of the challenges that we'll face. So I want to see the things that we've looked at these two key lines here in the meeting, that Draghi and this morning, and they both spoke clearly about this, that Europe is at a decisive moment to not risking to condemn itself into irrelevance. So I think that there's something similar between those two interventions. How have you perceived these appeals, and how much do you share them? Are they really these delicate points? Maybe from your speech we've heard a bit about this. So I think, yeah, we're in a very delicate moment. The changes at the geopolitical level are clearly fundamental. What's happening in the world level puts us in front of some choices. Europe needs to be able to face this challenge, but in spurring Europe forward, we don't need to push Europe in general. We need to push all of ourselves forward, because we're all part of this great attempt, this great Europe. So we must also seek to comprehend that Europe can undergo this revolution in the sharing of the roles and the different institutions, but also, above all, seeking to put itself into a position as an authoritative interlocutor in the international setup. So I'm not talking half full glass, half empty glass. The question is, would you like to not have tariffs? If that was the question, I'd say sure. But that can't be the question. The question is, given the conditions we have, did we make a good agreement or not? If we compare it with the other tariffs and deals that have been made, I'd say that our agreement was pretty positive. It doesn't mean that I'm happy that we've got tariffs, because it becomes very complex to explain oneself or to speak in this way. But in the 15% that we have got, that's what we had. Just different to the percentages in other areas, which is worse than that. So it's a clear difference. It's important. As a result of what? Is something can be happy about? No, because nobody would like to have this trade war, but and on important sectors which we're still discussing. But I think Europe could have done more. Maybe, yeah. But maybe what you have to ask ourselves what and how would we do it? Because it's complex and difficult to face these questions that are just pointing somebody should have done something more, somebody in general. But given the fact that what we've seen, a complex work, a collaboration that's very positive between European Commission, which has a specific role in this, specific competences, but also that brought out a collaboration that was very important with the member states to get to a result that from my point of view represents given the conditions we have, pretty much the best possible result we could have. But we need to keep working to implement it, to improve it. Also the topic of conflicts and of the role of Europe, this too is a complex theme, because it's not that we can't define it on the basis of a position, a generic position of Europe, because to have a protagonism in conflict, you need to overcome the first theme from which we start from, i.e. the capacity to invest in the defense sector that lets you have that security and that role as a protagonist, which we share inevitably with the member states now. So let's say that I think that spurring on is good, and knowing that we all have to help each other. If somebody pushes and somebody doesn't, or I have difficult to see who needs to be spurred and who doesn't, and finding the solutions. It's critical to give an alternative that's useful, and to avoid instead saying this is no good, we're marginal. But yes, okay, in some ways we are marginal. In other ways, I don't think so. And I think that the effort of the Europe has put in the recent months, it's not a party spirit, but one of going to define an agreement with the countries in South America, the Mercosur group, to opening a very important market there. And I think this will produce tensions in some areas. We need to discuss it to deal with frontier controls and so on. And it always has positives and negatives, but a big continental market that opens like that is a positive thing, and for Europe and particularly for Italy, it's a great opportunity for our country, and as the European Commission to have started a journey of dialogue. As the Commission, we were all together to meet the Indian government, even on their territory. This is a very important positive dialogue. And having done it with other realities, South Africa and in Asia. And this represents the idea that there can be a protagonism, that some of these questions can be overcome, can be strengthened, going over the barriers of the internal market that we've got, and also interlocuting with other areas, other people. So differently, otherwise it would become difficult to get to solutions. And this is why I think that never like in this moment, this delicate, difficult, complex moment, we need not to say something or other, but to do something concrete, and above all, to contribute with a constructive spirit in finding the solutions. And so, thinking of solutions, you used inevitably and rightly the word defense, because obviously we're in a context that we can't ignore that. We can't. But I was also struck by your call to the Baltic countries. It's not that their frontier is different. It's our shared border. It's possible, and it's possible that geopolitical tensions would spread around. But rightly, you said that President Vittadini, that you recalled us to the fact that defence spending at European level and also at the individual state and nation level, this can create some collateral effects, so that we're ending with have to save money in other sectors. So the great fear for the countries that take part in a system, a supranational system of states, as you said about Europe, we have a welfare that has got something to say to the other countries. The risk is that we end up eroding this heritage we've got, which has guaranteed 80 years of prosperity in our continent. With what prerogatives? I'm sure it's a very complex situation, but if we can manage to pick out some certainties in this big ocean. Starting from a fact, that what do we mean by defense? Because otherwise defense, we associate it with the war, the current war, and it's very difficult. If instead in defense we think about it as a central fundamental topic that represents an element that can guarantee the security and therefore requires some input from the European institutions, a guarantee for the member states. I think this is a different element. So if for defense we mean buying weapons, or that's one thing, which certainly, yeah, that's there. But if we also mean guaranteeing infrastructure, or the agreement that was shared at the international level, that's the 2.5%, some of that can go on infrastructure. I personally think I'm always looking from my background when I speak of something to try and go deep down, get close to it. So I think in these countries, having been to these Baltic countries at the border with Russia, and I went to all of the regions on the borders, and there I saw the great difference between the capital city and these areas. And seeing that in these areas that they needed to redefine complexively the idea of development, because in Lapland in Finland, it's rather Russian. So in other countries, so we need to go to the idea of defining, reconstructing the idea of development in those territories. This represents also the value of investing in defense, beyond the fact that that defense spending also means cybersecurity, innovation. It means opportunity and job opportunities. Because when years ago we started to invest in drones, nobody imagined that the civil use that was the objective they could end up being one of the principal weapons in warfare that we know now. So this idea of investing in defense shouldn't be presented just in a kind of weaponized way and linked only to the war situation, but it represents a chance for a dual use, civil and military, that can be a decisive factor in also for constructing a European dimension. The border with Russia, with Belarus, for some countries in Europe, this is a theme that we need to consider, or do we not want to do it? Do we want to pretend that it's far away and it's nothing to do with us? These are all fundamental topics that we need to share with and live with it. So I'm used to saying things as they are, because it's clear that if you say we're against war and we're for feast and we can't do this investment, then we might gather a load of applause and be happy, but we get into impossible situations that are unreal. So contradictions that contradicts everything that's going on in the world, and with what has to be the principal strategy to go and construct a European defence that's able to guarantee this, to guarantee our security, a security that is also food security. It's not just the security of war, but it's a security linked to the necessity that Europe has for its strategic autonomy, that it be able to have within itself the capacity to resist, because we don't want to forget that in 2022 we discovered, quote, that we all depended on energy for Russia. And we all knew it. And straight away we were almost able to cut this down to zero with a series with difficulties, but this theme of energy is certainly a central theme, and we need also to understand that geopolitically we need to carry on an action that's different to, for example, the global gateway, which links itself to that of the Mattei and von der Leyen plan. President Maloney spoke to us. She was linking these two things together. The European budget will double resources for the global gateway because the Africa topic is central. Or do we want to be spectators, really, and watch who takes control of Africa, which is a continent that has great opportunities, that has great or possibilities and opportunities in terms of all the necessities that we need to construct an adequate system. But these things that we need to think about, because these themes are the ones that Europe needs to build its dimension on. It needs to use the resources it's got in the right way. If we speak of an enlargement of the European Union in the Balkans, Ukraine, then we're talking of an enlargement that has a cost. We need to say it would have an impact on cohesion, because if we enlarge, then we bring in countries that are have much higher poverty than we have. So then the parameters change unless we decide to invest a lot in there. So if we enlarge to Ukraine, then the topic of agriculture, which is a central one, and we should totally modify the situation at the European level. So we need to place these big questions if we want to have a vision about this. This is the effort that everybody, all the institutions should take and do a true analysis, because the alternative is the risk of a bit of a ping-pong political thing. Giorgio has got a lot of experience about this. I've got some political experience that in this idea of ping-pong with declarations, but to get into the substance and understand the rapidity with which the world is evolving doesn't give us the time to reflect, to deviate. We need to, right now, make some choices that will let us be up to speed with the times and give it a serious role, a central role for Europe in the worldwide context. This is the challenge in front of us. So about cohesion, which maybe it seems the last point, but one of the hot ones in our debate, I think that you really touched on a central part of the question when you spoke about enlargement in Middle Europe and other countries, Ukraine and so on, the Balkans, because we come from a season in which there was a great expansion in Europe, maybe with some enthusiasm, not maybe how we thought 20 years ago about the potential of enlarging Europe, but then there's been a sort of reflux, if you like, a reflection on its risks, also the collateral side effects of it, that we've asked ourselves a bit, how much was it positive or not, enlarging Europe to other countries, maybe less historical, if you like. So we've got a big theme of Ukraine's a big question there, because then you would talk about a clear problem, ethnic problem also. In geopolitics, this has had some impact. So this also points to the questions about cohesion, economic, social, cultural cohesion, because we talk about countries that don't have history that they dialogue together nicely, that's like Spain and France, than the founders did. So what is the position that Europe needs to take in front of these challenges? And so enlargement can be healthy, can be good, but would it give us stability, or would it open new challenges that could be even harder than the ones we're already facing? Sure, it certainly opens challenges, but the Ukraine topic is one that has a value that goes beyond these considerations at the moment. So if first the discussion was legitimate about this topic, now even for the quantity of resources that have been invested in these years to keep the position, because we're playing a game of values that we can't throw everything always into just on the economic aspects, but there's also a question of values, central values that have constructed Europe, that they are values that we find even another element of comparison against the world. So there's some demarcation lines between the democracies and the rest. When I spoke about the commercial agreements with the Mercosur countries, with India, which is the greatest democracy, the biggest democracy, and some other African countries in South Africa, in Asia. Here we're also talking about a game of values. So this is a fundamental point. If we can imagine to not consider important these themes, or to be able to justify everything on terms of commercial or economic interests, we need to also have the ability to keep these values in mind. So democracy is a value, a fundamental value, and that we often took for granted. But now we see around the world that it's not to be taken for granted. It's a theme on which we need to concentrate our attention, build up the politics of intervention, create the conditions through which this theme can be focused on. So also there are different systems and that have different capacities to decide or to act efficaciously, given their institutional structure, but nevertheless perhaps leave behind the social situation that we spoke about before, as Giorgio said. So on these themes, it's a really important game we're playing, and I think it's fundamental in this direction. But the theme of cohesion represents an internal valuation that's really important. We live in a condition in Europe, including Italy, of course, in which we have this big difference with big urban areas and the internal areas, the rural areas. We need to consider what this means, because we risk to find ourselves in Europe in many areas with a depopulation that can bring to a desertification of entire parts of the European landmass, with dramatic consequences. And at the same time, we have a second question, which, as I said before, which is that of the concentration of the population in the big urban areas, which is bringing its own social problems, its own emergencies. Think of housing. Finding a house that's accessible to a young couple today is one of the most complex things that could be. So on this theme, we need to try to understand how we can point politics at this, reading the different situations that we have in the European context, because we have different situations, different scenarios within the European context, different in the different member states. So we need to look for adequate, concrete responses in the European Commission programme, using also the work we've been doing before. I spoke at the conference about this, and at the European level. This is the representative with the European Affairs Minister, and this relationship that faces a lot of questions. One particular I'll cite, the right to stay. Today we have a phenomenon that, and it's right that young people can move around Europe and the world, certainly, to do their experiences, but it becomes a problem when you're obliged to go away from the place where you were born and where you'd like to live. And so the theme of internal areas, of depopulation of the internal areas, the lack of infrastructure from the point of material and immaterial and social setup, these also, we must strengthen these in the European context, and to face these questions together with the reorganization of urban areas. This fits in the context of the demographic crisis that we need to face. This is a clearly very important topic, and I don't want to get into this detail, but when we went in India, we saw what it means to have the opposite of this, what it means a projection in the next decades of this dimension of growth. So it's things we need to face with a lot of attention and aim our resources at this. It's easily, or is it? Oh, no, it's difficult, but there's another element, which is the quality of our expenditure. We need to have the capacity and the courage to say that at a national level and a European level, in the past, often the quality of public spending was great in certain sectors without looking at the true objectives. So the quantity was abundant. So we need to improve public spending to give it a quality of public spending, and the cohesion policy can be a central element in this direction. Thank you.
Thank you, President Fitto. So, do you have any conclusions for these first bits we've said here? It's been complicated, obviously, but I'll offer you a couple of bits of food for thought here from what we've been talking about here earlier. You know, this demographic problems, the desertification of rural areas, you know, it's particularly important here, and it all connects with the ideas of development plans, of using public spending properly that we were just been talking about now. And this is something that Europe, more often than not, has fallen behind a bit. But also, you know, economic questions, how the cost of living, the cost of housing, that are very close to the hearts of many European citizens. The issues of welfare. We've been talking about the budget. And I've been struck by what you were saying here, that you're talking about the need to simplify, the need for simplification, which is that something that that's the economic world is asking for here? And so now it's up. Let's hear from you. Thank you. I'd like to thank Vice President Fitto and Giorgio here. It's been very interesting to hear the development of this discussion, because we began from the launching point of this meeting, which was about which contained 3 terms: cohesion, development, and unified Europe. Cohesion means strengthening the sense of belonging between current countries to the point where they can forge a single path. In terms of the tools, I'll try to, reducing economic and territorial inequalities that we've been talking about, until coming to a point of building a welfare system that, for us, has been with us for all these years, but that is in need of an evaluation on future sustainability. Development, definitely, because Europe has and must have this capacity for sustainable development, and it's becoming ever more complex. So, for me, within this trajectory, I was struck by some of the things that came up from what you were saying, because some themes, the Europe has a it's obvious that Europe has a institutional complexity. Hearing about how a budget is made and how long it takes, it makes that obvious. Flexibility, the capacity for change, simplification, and the speed of decision making. These, for those of us who are in business, are terms that affect us every day, that come up often, because in a business trajectory we plan how budgets, investments, and how to undertake them for development. But then we also have to look at the needs to be able to predict change and be able to react and decide. To do this, one must have a clear awareness of the factors that the Vice President was talking about, of the key values that allow us to lean on that key point through which I can then change and decide. That change in decision making, and then the speed with which all this happens isn't a silly risk. It's not something random, but you need to come to terms with these founding values, the reasons for which we've started business, or that Europe was made. This is a factor that must be clear. It can't be something that's something from a long time ago that's not relevant to me anymore. On the contrary, it must be re-verified constantly, depending on our current reality. And we've come to define certain strategies for development that I've been looking at a lot. In an integrated economic union that today has to do with a budget that's worth maybe 1% of the European GDP, that's very less than the spending of many of the states. And this limits our strategic investment options, which we need when faced with these challenges. The European Industrial Programme is faced with a change in many sectors. For example, I'm in the automotive sector. There's been huge changes that are very significant, and it affects the territorial issues that need a policy that can favor a growing change that would otherwise businesses in certain regions and that couldn't have the necessary economic impact. And so to do things separately as individual countries is definitely creates less possibilities than it would be if we to do it together. We've been talking about energy, we've been talking about the single market. Energy is a substantially different topic, one that really affects Europe's economic competitivity. The cohesion funds that we've been talking about earlier, We also need to look at, education and training, so this may become a factor of integration. So have to have some common themes here, because investments in the future, investing in communities to become a series of unified countries, if you don't aim to educate the youth as a factor for growth for an institution, then we might not get very far if we don't. It's become clear that, I liked how much the topic of geopolitics came up, because external affairs for somewhere like Italy is very important, and strengthening new markets. We've been talking about India, we've been talking about Africa, because we have a whole continent near us here that we might have managed to infect with a positive economy, which is the European one. We've left other countries and other forms of understanding the economy. We've allowed them to enter. It's more difficult now, but this is a road we need to take. These are obviously less wealthy markets than the American one, but as we've seen with the tariffs, but they also, with the changes we've been mentioning earlier, do have some potential that's necessary to explore. So, just thinking about a sentence that Vice President Fitto said, that spurring Europe to spur us all. And this is a fundamental idea, that European cohesion, as we've been talking about today, is not about coming together more closely economically or technically, but we need to start with social subjects here. It's not an agreement between neutral territories, the example of urban areas or internal areas, but it's the idea of interpersonal relations, of relations between the fabric of society. It's made by businesses, by schools, by hospitals, by services, that translates, as President Draghi said earlier, between intermediary bodies, which are the structures that promote dialogue between institutions and between nations. So starting from social subjects, from people, I think this will be something that will allow us, that will translate the economic aspects with that of development, and that of the fundamental values that led us to down this path for development, that can't be brought into question, but will affect the rapidity of change, and will affect how the intensity of these questions that are coming up. And it's obviously necessary that our discussion involve everyone. Thank you. Our time is coming to an end here. I'd like to thank our guests here, Vittadini, Fitto and Dellabianca. Thank you all for being here. We hope it's been useful for you. Thank you.
Questo è un luogo che genera dialogo,
Qualcuno che si impegna, che si batte.
che approfondisce la conoscenza e sostiene la fiducia. È un crocevia dove si incontra chi desidera il vero, il bello, il giusto e il bene. È una testimonianza di speranza nel cuore ferito del presente. E tutto questo esiste anche grazie a te.
bello avere quello che ti serve quando ti serve. Con Easy Bank, la banca digitale di Intesa San Paolo. Easy Bank, semplicemente banca.